Our guest this week comes to us from the city of Kyiv in Ukraine, where he's covering the war for WGN Chicago and an array of social media platforms. A fascinating fellow with a colorful media history, he's an alumnus of the University of Notre Dame, who began his career at the Weekly Standard magazine and then had a tumultuous career at Fox News as Roger Ailes' protege. He was prominently featured as a character portrayed by actor Emery Cohen in the Showtime miniseries titled Loudest Voice. In early 2020, he landed in Ukraine for a speaking gig at a media conference at Ukrainian Catholic University just as the world began shutting down because of COVID. Anticipating a calm and free environment in Ukraine for weathering a pandemic, he chose to stay during the worldwide lockdowns. Then Russia invaded, and he committed to staying and reporting every day until victory. His 10-minute daily reports are heard live every weekday morning on WGN's Bob Surratt Show, where they're being very well received for their thoroughness and not only filling in blanks left out by the mainstream media, but really giving insight into the lives and feelings of the brave Ukrainian people. These reports are also being made available on social media as well as his website, UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Our guest this week is Joe LIndsley. Welcome to the Michael Harrison Interview, the weekly podcast from Podcast One for media freaks, pop culture aficionados, political junkies, and the philosophically curious. Thank you for downloading this program from Podcast One, Apple Podcasts, the Podcast One app, Spotify, and TALKER'S magazine. I can be reached directly via email at michael@talkers.com. If you find this show to be of interest and value, please subscribe to it as well as giving it a positive 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Okay, here we go. An uninterrupted conversation with the editor of UkrainianFreedomNews.com, Joe LIndsley. Joe LIndsley, welcome to the Michael Harrison Interview. And you're in Kyiv at the moment. Tell us about your surroundings.
Well, today is, I just arrived in Kyiv yesterday. I spent the past several weeks primarily in Kharkiv, a city just 30 miles from Russia. It was pretty intense there pretty often. But here in Kyiv, it's very notable because it's a beautiful spring-like day, which is a clear reminder to me that Ukrainians have made it through this winter with hardly any Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. You know, I've been here every moment of Russia's full-scale invasion. And last winter was like the Middle Ages. Often there was, for many hours of the day, there was no electricity, no power, no hot water. And everyone thought, in all the headlines last fall, we're expecting, this to happen again. And it hasn't. And I think this is a major story that's been missed, is that there's been no Russian winter offensive on Ukraine. And we're just about through the winter. And I think it's a sign of strength for Ukraine.
Yeah, but right now in the United States, there seems to be, amidst all of the controversy over whether or not we're going to support Ukraine, there seems to be a feeling of dread that the Russians are just waiting it out now and are going to wrap it up soon if the Ukrainians don't get some type of military aid, more ammunition, etc., from the Western powers. What's the reality of that from your perspective?
Well, certainly. I mean, this is, everyone here feels that, support could be waning in two different ways. I mean, one, if you look at in the arguments in Washington, you have, primarily coming from the Republican side, those who don't want to support Ukraine anymore, and they don't see the reason to believe in this cause. But then you have the White House, the Biden administration. We just marked this 2-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. And 2 years later, they still are very reluctant to send long-range weapons and to send permission for Ukrainians to hit Russian military bases within Russia. The United Kingdom has sent long-range missiles like the Storm Shadow missiles, and they said, do whatever you want with them. Do whatever you need to do to win. The White House still refuses to do that. So there's problems both on the Republican and Democratic side. And so that does, that's a heaviness that everyone feels here. And this is precisely why I spent the past several weeks in Kharkiv, which is, as I said, it's a city 30 miles from Russia. It's so close to the Russian border that the missiles usually arrive before the air raid alarm can sound. So it's absolutely terrifying. But at the same time, it's a thriving city. And I was there 1 year ago when it was pretty dark and pretty bleak. Since then, so many people have come back, even including Ukrainian women who can leave the country whenever they want. So many of them have returned to Kharkiv to live in that city as their act of defiance. And even there was maybe 3 weeks ago a major missile attack on the same block as my regular coffee shop. And about 5 or 6 hours later, after that attack, 8 o'clock in the morning, I went to that coffee shop, and amid the debris and the glass, which everyone was trying to sweep up, they opened on time, cheerfully serving their customers. And so that part of the story gets missed. That Ukrainians, even that close to the Russian threat, refused to give up. And if there were long-range weapons like ATACMS and more HIMARS, for example, from the U.S., and if Ukraine had permission to hit places in Russia, you could create a buffer zone. You could at least start to make that city safer in the same way that, Kyiv, we all remember the images of Kyiv in the first months of the war. Kyiv was incredibly dangerous. Kyiv is so protected now because of the Patriot missile defense system. It shows that it's possible to protect these cities. Over the weekend for the anniversary events of Ukraine holding on for 2 years, you had so many foreign leaders in Kyiv, and I love Kyiv, but in some ways I feel that Kyiv has become a Disney World for foreign leaders. If you want to boost your poll numbers, come to Kyiv, you get a great photo op, and because they know it's safe. And I think this shows that with the right resolve, other cities in Ukraine could be equally well protected.
There's got to be a surrealistic aspect to all of this, city bustling on one level, being terribly dangerous on another, the safety factor that creates a photo opportunity for world leaders. It must seem insane. It absolutely must be very difficult to wrap your brain around it. Am I correct?
Yeah, it is. I even on a couple of days ago on Sunday, I went with some Ukrainian friends. They called me on Sunday morning. I was in Kharkiv and said, "Hey, do you want to come with us to Donbass, right to the war zone, to the front?" They were delivering some supplies to the front. And I said, okay, you always get a bit of a sick feeling in your stomach. And, as you pass through each checkpoint, you're getting closer and closer to the threat, to the Russian invaders. And you go through these beautiful rolling hills of Donbass. And I remember we entered down into a valley, and I see this pretty large village on either side of the road, totally destroyed, like something from a Hollywood blockbuster film. But then on the highway in front of us and passing us, you see military vehicles and civilian vehicles with license plates from all over Europe. And so you see this amid the ongoing hell. You see the people who are unafraid, who come here or they face their fears and are this incredible sense of encouragement. So that's why it is surreal indeed, Michael, because there's so much fear, but then with the people around you, you get so much strength and encouragement. I think it's easier to be fearful when you're far away. Like even when I'm in Lviv, which is, pretty safe city, I think I have more apprehension. But when I'm in Kharkiv, there's no time to be afraid. You just get up and you do things.
How close to harrowing situations and danger have you been? You mentioned before that the coffee shop that you had frequented suddenly was destroyed, and you've got to say to yourself, my gosh, what if I were there when that happened? Have you had any close encounters with danger and death?
Unfortunately, yes. And unfortunately, I'm still here. And, I happened to be in Ukraine during the pandemic, and I stayed here. It was a free, lovely place to be during that time. And when the full-scale invasion started, I was in Lviv, and I had sort of been traveling the world for a while. I used to, I was once protege to the chairman of Fox News, and I had a strange media career in New York. And I said, there's got to be a reason why I'm here. I know this country very well. And I started speaking with WGN Radio in Chicago with Bob Surratt. And that's every single day now, every single weekday, Monday through Friday for 2 years. It's hard for me to believe sometimes. I speak for 10 minutes on WGN. And after maybe the first month, I spent the first month of the war in Lviv. And I said, well, I have this audience listening every day. And I said, I need to bring them with me throughout Ukraine. And so we started to raise money, and we would, to buy supplies for soldiers and for humanitarian needs. And just through all the people I knew here, I could get pretty much anywhere I wanted in the country. And my mission was then to, in those 10-minute lifeline, or that 10-minute window on WGN Radio every day, to bring people into the situation. And sometimes, there's moments of humor and inspiration, but yeah, there's been some terrifying times. Whether it's, was it in around New Year's in January, the Russians were sending drones and rockets to the city of Lviv, which is not often attacked. And it was a cloudy night, and you could see the red glare of the air defense system frantically firing from the center of the city, this beautiful, majestic medieval city of Lviv. And so you have this this vision of a beautiful city, like fairy tale city. And then in the sky, it looks like Star Wars, and all this stuff is, it's right over your head. Especially when those attacks happen in an unexpected place like Lviv, I think it's more terrifying. But it's a strange thing. Like in Kharkiv, it's literally Russian roulette, you could say. I mean, every place there could be hit at any moment. Lately, the Russians, over New Year's, they started attacking hotels where aid workers stay, for example, and journalists. And you know that at any moment, I mean, if you lie in your bed or on the couch and you close your eyes in Kharkiv, you know at any moment something could hit. And so often, especially in January, I would sleep in the bathroom in Kharkiv, as many people do there, because missiles hit quite close, and it's, but for the grace of God and some luck, you're able to, you're still alive. And so people go through that mentality every single day, and you never quite get used to it. And there certainly is an adrenaline element. And I would say probably, Michael, the closest was this wild day. I was with a team of Americans, and the team had delivered some generators to a little village, a frontline village in Zaporizhia. This was summer of 2022. And we go down to, and the village was the birthplace of a great Ukrainian hero, Nestor Makhno. He was sort of defender of this Cossack idea of like orderly anarchy. And so we go down to this village, and the Russians were just a few kilometers away, and the village comes under constant shelling. And sometimes I wonder what we were thinking. We wanted to see the reality. And as we're driving through the village, artillery is falling left and right. Our driver was extremely fast. He had bullet holes in his car from when he had been doing evacuations in Donbass, and he was playing this awful Russian chanson music from like the 1950s. I couldn't stand it, and it was blasted on full volume. But I couldn't complain about the music because he was an amazing driver. And at one point, we're stopped at a checkpoint, and artillery hits. It was sort of this surreal thing. But Russian artillery was firing toward us, and we jumped out of the car. And we had a young girl with us as a translator. So we're all trying to protect her, covering her on the side of the road, not knowing, where the fire is going to come from next. And it's moments like that when you say, how have I ended up in this? But I think the main thing is the courage, how you don't see people panic. Even walking the streets of any city I've been in, if I'm outside during a missile attack, you don't see people running. And people, it is that action of collective calm that gives you some kind of bizarre, strange courage to keep facing this.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. From a broadcasting standpoint, are the listeners to WGN supporting this? Is there excitement, anticipation? Is this serving their broadcasting interests well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm very grateful to Bob for sticking with it. And I remember it was the first week, or the week after the full-scale invasion started. In the lead up, I had been talking on a lot of different stations, TV and radio in the U.S. And I was a rare voice back then saying, I don't think Ukraine's going to fall in 3 days. And so WGN called me the following week. And on air, Bob said, Joe, we thought you were crazy last week. You were the only voice saying, I don't think this country's going to lose in 3 days. And so Bob made a promise, Bob Surratt, the host of the morning show on WGN, he said, we're going to keep you on every day until this is over. And so the audience has stuck with it. And I think there's something it's about 10 minutes every day. And so that the limited time that gives you a focus. I have to be sharp in these stories, but because it's every day, I have a freedom. I have a freedom to bring people to places, beyond the headlines, to go into Ukrainian history and music, and to share, the history of the Maidan Revolution of 2014 and how we got here, and to share the stories of the conversations I have, whether it's with soldiers or civilians, and to bring people just that 10-minute window every day. And I try to imagine people driving to work in Chicago, what kind of stories do they want to hear? And I know about, there's a lot of problems, of course, in America. And I think the story of Ukraine, as I see it, is not a tragic. I mean, there's tragedy, but it's not a tragic story. There's moments of inspiration and humor. There's certainly a lot of gallows humor here. And so what I try to do is share that, every single day, and be mindful of, on Mondays, people need inspiration. Well, I'm surrounded by inspiration here. And so to be mindful of the audience, and not, to bring them on this journey. As I say it, Ukraine, for every American I know who's come here, from like liberal Harvard professors to conservative American veterans, they all say that this country has helped them. It's been like the best self-help book. And so in this daily broadcast, that's what I've attempted to unveil. And Michael, it's been incredible. Not only have we had WGN listeners send money to buy, initially to buy things like boots and bulletproof vests. Now they're buying drones, anything they can to help. But listeners have come here to Ukraine to volunteer. And so I get to, so they'll write messages to the station, and then they'll show up here. And so it's this incredible community. And never before in human history has someone sitting, in their living room in Chicago or Wisconsin or anywhere, been able to participate in this kind of freedom fight in such a profound way. And every once in a while we get, like, for example, yesterday, Bob Siraz read on air a comment from a listener, perhaps, or maybe it was a Russian operative, saying, we're tired of this. We don't need to hear this anymore. And whenever that happens, the next day, the station is inundated with messages saying, we want to keep listening to this story. And I think even for those who, people who ideologically don't support this, I would say at the very least, hopefully it's not boring. I mean, I'll continue here. I promise crazily to do it every day. So even from the rubble and the ruins, I'll still be sharing the story. And we're not at that point right now, but I hope at the very least it's something captivating that can give people some, not only insights about what's happening around the world, but actually lessons on how to live better lives.
No question. Yeah. Now, you happened to be there by happenstance. You were in Ukraine. You decided to stay there during the pandemic as a place to ride the pandemic out. And all of a sudden, you're in one of the world's hotspots. I see in the material that I have, UkrainianFreedomNews.com. I'm not quite sure what that is. So my question is, how are you financing this trip, this 2 years now that you've been there? And what platform are you officially representing? Are you financing this yourself? Are you? How is your structure from a broadcast business standpoint?
Well, I would say it's not the most business-like. When I was in my early 20s, I became protege to the chairman of Fox News. It was a very bizarre story, but Roger Ailes sort of told me that his vision was that I would learn the lessons from him and one day run Fox News. And Rupert Murdoch's sort of consigliere told me the same thing. And so I had this, I flew on private jets, and I had this quite extraordinary, bizarre life in my early 20s. But I was uncomfortable with several things there. And one of them was I felt we were too disconnected from what was happening around the world. And anyway, so for several reasons, I quit. It's sort of like the mafia, though. Everything I knew, I wasn't allowed to walk away. They came after me. I escaped in a car chase to the Hudson Valley. All kinds of things happened. And then several years after that, Showtime and Blumhouse Productions made a TV show in which Russell Crowe played my boss and some actor played me. It's Hollywood, so not everything's quite accurate. And I took some of the money from that, and I said, I'm just going to travel the world and sort of. I really in Ukraine in the pandemic, I could get away from all the turmoil in the world. And that's really what I wanted. And then all of a sudden the turmoil and returned. And even people I used to know in New York and Washington were now in Lviv, in my regular places. And so I said, okay, I had my break, my time to step away. and that my the TV show paid for that time. I said, now this is my mission. This is everything I always wanted to do. It's why I'm a writer and a journalist. And by the way, I'm a writer. I was a bit nervous of the radio medium to start, and now I love it because it's with the radio. And I know it's a side answer to your question, but like I can't just take a picture or video of what I see. I can't take anything for granted. I have to give that picture with my words to the audience, and what's more, and I have to do it live. I have to do it right away. And so this has been, I think that I can give people a sense, like make them really feel like what it's like to be here, because I can't rely on photos and videos. I really have to bring them into the story. And so I never thought, I was in the world of TV and print, but the medium of radio and podcast, I think, is a great, in our time of information overload, is really a great way for us to see what a real experience is. And fortunately, I volunteered. I guess I am a bit crazy, but I volunteer. I do this as a volunteer. But we have amazing donors, through the WGN audience and through other audiences. We have several other podcasts with our Ukrainian Freedom News team, and donors who support to keep this operation going. And most of the money that they send, we send to soldiers and to humanitarian needs. But I'm able to keep going here, and that's So it's a passion project. I'm happy you're here, Michael, that if I had stayed at Fox, and this really hit home for me last week when I was in Kharkiv. Brett Baer of Fox came to Kharkiv to interview President Zelensky, and so credit to him, for being brave to come here and to do that interview. But as he said in the promotional package for the interview, he traveled in an armored car from Kyiv to Kharkiv. And then he describes how they came into Kharkiv, a city under curfew. They only showed Kharkiv in the dark. And then he interviewed President Zelensky near the front line. And respect to him for that. But it also showed me why I left Fox News and why I'm very happy to be reporting on WGN every day. If I had seen that report as just a regular American, interested in the news and what's happening, I would think that Kharkiv is a city that's almost lost, a city that's like Bakhmut, almost destroyed. And that's the total opposite. Kharkiv is a city that, restaurants and businesses and shops have been opening, new people, entrepreneurs opening new places. Even weeks after a place gets bombed, people open it up and repair it and keep going. They refuse to give up. It's a lovely place. There's no crime. The streets are clean. It's an inspiring place, and it's totally, someone with all the resources of Fox, all the money in the world, all the reporting resources, and could come there and miss that story. That's what I could not stand in that world. And that's why I'd rather be, doing this as a wildcat adventurer, as long as I have those precious 10 minutes every single day to share the truth of what I see on WGN.
So your platform basically is UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Is that a place people can go to plug into what you're doing and follow your activities?
Indeed. In fact, every WGN show, I have a video version of it. And at UkrainianFreedomNews.com, you can follow us on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter. So, for example, on YouTube, you can watch the daily broadcast. And so that online audience, at last, is starting to grow as we're sort of focusing on that to reach people in other places around the world and around the U.S. And so we also welcome donations there for anyone who wants to keep our operations alive and also to help Ukrainians in need, including soldiers. And in a few days, we're going to have that website will be revamped because we're bringing together the best voices about Ukraine, the best experts and analysts into one website. So right now, the website is just really a platform for my shows and my interviews. I also do an interview with Ukrainian media, independent media here, which, by the way, so many people in America think there's not free press in Ukraine. There is. I work with them, Ukrainska Pravda, and we interview English-speaking Ukrainians and Americans and other foreigners who come here to share their stories. So all of that you can find at UkrainianFreedomNews.com.
There's been concern that Zelensky might be, extending martial law and undoing any democracy that might exist there. That's one of the arguments critics of foreign aid to Ukraine have mounted. What is your observation of that? Is Zelensky popular still? Does he make sense? Is he, in fact, taking advantage of this to consolidate his power, or is that necessary?
Well, I think, Michael, the first key to understand of that is Ukraine's Maidan revolution in 2014. And I first came to this country in 2018. And so I know many people who were part of that revolution. And it was such a powerful thing. It was, the people stood in the streets, in the main squares of cities around the country, but especially Kyiv 10 years ago from last week. And they refused to leave until the Soviet-minded pro-Putin regime fled. And because of that moment was so powerful, and it changed, the direction of Ukraine. And that's the very reason why there's a war. If there was no Maidan revolution, there'd be no war today, because Putin would control Ukraine like he controls Belarus. And you hear so often in conversation and in political discourse here about the Maidan. And like everyone in power is, in a sense, afraid of the Maidan. They know if you push the people too far, you could have the revolution again. You could have people, and the notable thing about it, at the Maidan revolution, they weren't burning things down. They were just staying in the square. They built barricades, but they weren't looting businesses. It's a very unusual, powerful event. But politicians know that if you push the people, and I saw this during the pandemic. I mean, in Ukraine, unlike in France and many European countries, they didn't lock people in their houses. They knew if you did that, you'd have a Maidan. It's like a fourth branch of government, the real parliament of the people. And so that is still a powerful mentality in the wartime. And we've seen this happen a few times. I mean, in the first few months of the full-scale invasion, President Zelensky suggested very briefly that maybe there could be some situation where, they could agree to let the Russians keep Crimea for a while. And people began to talk about it online, that you could feel the temperature of the people say, no, absolutely not. And Zelensky changed his ideas. We've seen this also with the policies on how people are conscripted into the military. So that is the essence of Ukraine. I think we think in terms of political leaders, and the Russians want this. They're like, oh, the Zelensky regime. If you come to Ukraine, if you go to Donbass or Zaporizhia or Kherson near the front line, you see that this is a story of individual people. They believe in their faith, their family, their freedom. It's very American that a lot of this gets missed. They don't want to give up. They don't want to live in Russian occupation. And so that's the essence of it. There's Ukrainians do not worship their politicians. And that's why the previous commander-in-chief, Zaluzhny, that people were very upset when Zelensky dismissed him, because he was more popular than Zelensky. Politicians are not very popular in Ukraine. That's a fact. But Zelensky, because he didn't flee, that even people who didn't like him before and might have blamed him for sort of appeasing the Russians in the lead up to this, there is a basic respect for him. And I think outside of this, we can forget how extraordinary it was that he stayed. In World War II, think of all the kings and queens and prime ministers that went into exile. It was remarkable that Zelensky stayed, and he certainly gets points for that. But among most Ukrainians with whom I speak, even though you could go to any coffee shop or bar in Kyiv or Kharkiv, and people will complain about the president, because free speech continues to thrive here.
It's almost as if the nature of the people and the nature of the nation itself promotes democracy, whether it's written into a constitution or not. The politicians have to deal with the nature of a people not to be pushed too far. And you've described that very well, and it's a fascinating insight. Joe, we wish you well. It was enlightening to talk to you, and I really appreciate your taking the time in your busy schedule, to say the least. And we hope that you remain safe and continue to do the work that you're doing. Certainly a major contribution to the radio industry and to, of course, ultimately the peace, freedom, and democracy of the world. Thank you so much for joining us on this. I really appreciate it.
Michael, thank you. And I will take any time to speak to anyone in America. So if there's, any other radio stations, I travel the country. I'm here. I'm happy to speak, and to share stories from here and to take questions. And if anyone wants to follow along, UkrainianFreedomNews.com, WGN Radio with Bob Surratt every single day so far for 2 years and counting. Thank you, Michael, for this opportunity to speak with you. And I'll keep telling the stories. I welcome you to follow along.
And there you have it, an uninterrupted conversation with Joe LIndsley in Kyiv, Ukraine. You can learn more about Joe and his reports at UkrainianFreedomNews.com. Thank you for downloading this program from Podcast One, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Podcast One app, and Talkers Magazine. I can be reached directly via email at michael@talkers.com. If you find this show to be of interest and value, please subscribe to it as well as giving it a positive 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Matthew B. Harrison, the Michael Harrison Interview. Thank you for listening.
The Michael Harrison Interview is a co-presentation of Podcast One and Talkers Magazine. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved.